A lot of low back pain can be from hip immobility that causes them to be overusing their back. Like if they don't have proper hamstring length or just hip range of motion, they can't get into good setups for their deadlift, their squat. And when they're in the end range of their hip mobility, then they're getting it from elsewhere. You rob Peter to pay Paul. If you're not getting it from the hips because they're tight or they're weak or you don't have that motor patterning, then you're going to get it from somewhere else. And typically I think that's the low back. I mean, it can be the knees, can be the ankles. That's what, there's a lot going on there. So yeah, the hips, I think just general, again, like overuse, ramping up too fast. So, if you're going from doing CrossFit once a week or twice a week, and then you're there 5 days a week and you're doing hang cleans and hang power cleans and dumbbell snatches and devil's presses, and you're doing a lot of hinging and using the back, which is good and it helps strengthen it. But you go from doing that once or twice a week, now you're New Year's resolutioner, or your kids are done with their soccer season, so you're back and you're coming consistently, and then all of a sudden that spike in training volume, load, intensity is just too much for the back.
The fitness movement is brought to you by Zor Fitness. We offer coaching and individualized program design, as well as educational content for coaches and athletes. It's all at one place, zorfitness.com. You're like sitting back away from it like it. Scared of it?
Yeah, I told you I would talk with my hands.
It's normal.
Am I supposed to look at you?
You can look wherever you want. I mean, you can stare at the camera the whole time. It would just be a little bit awkward. It's like, what did Abby did that when she was on? She like Jim Halpered the camera. She like looked right at it. That's pretty funny. Well, welcome.
Thanks.
I feel like this has been like months in the making.
All good things are.
So you got a lot to live up to. It better be a great episode.
I'll try.
So you are a doctorate of physical therapy, right?
Yep.
And how is that different from other physical therapists?
So nowadays everybody has to be a doctorate of physical therapy, but it progressed, initially it was a bachelor's degree, then it was a master's, and now it's doctorate.
So you got to go to school for even longer.
Yeah. I mean, the idea was that so we'd have a little bit more freedoms, be able to like get X-ray imaging, be able to order that, and have our direct access license was a big push so that we could have people come see us directly rather than having to see the doctor, get a script, and then come see us.
Like the prescribing of things is like the main, like you can write prescriptions. Is that like what?
No. So no, we can't write prescriptions and we still can't order imaging.
Yeah.
That was like the initial hope.
That was going to be my other question about the imaging.
I think in like Oregon, PTs are allowed to order imaging, but not in Pennsylvania. Yeah, not really anywhere else. But the main thing that came with that was the direct access license, which is nice to have so that I can say, yeah, just come over and see me, and I can see them directly without having to have them go see their doctor or wait, months to go see an orthopedic and then come see us.
Mm-hmm. Cool. You got a bunch of other certifications. One is blood flow restriction. Do you use that at all?
Yeah, I do. I use blood flow in a lot of like post-op patients primarily, or if someone's really irritated and they can't tolerate load, or normal things that I would do to strengthen someone so that we can get a good effect without.
So you have cuffs at your practice? Cool.
Yeah. We actually have a couple different types of cuffs where I work at right now, so it's pretty cool.
How often do you use those practically?
It just depends on my caseload. If I have a lot of athletes, I use them a little bit more frequently. But definitely,
does like the average person just like complain about it?
Yeah, it's
like,
uncomfortable.
These are really tight and it hurts a lot.
Yeah, I mean, have you ever had it done?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like having your blood pressure taken when they pump it up the whole way, and then exercising without.
It's like getting your blood pressure taken continuously and then having to exercise.
Yeah. So
on both arms or both legs.
They don't love it, but some people are champs though. A lot of people, they're motivated. They're having surgery. They had ACL, so they get back to soccer or whatever they want to do, and so they're all about it because after being laid off for so long, they're just excited to get a sweat on. And
so you're a member here at Lumber Capital.
I am.
When did you join? When did you guys move over here?
January.
I
think we came like that first Saturday after we moved up here. Or no, it was a weekday.
I mean, you had called me up before you actually moved here, and we were kind of like scoping out gyms and stuff.
Yeah.
So obviously, like, fitness is a big priority of yours.
Part of the reason why I chose where I worked and lived.
Yeah.
Build it around my gym.
Yeah, crazy. And your sister owns Legends Strength and Fitness Warehouse. Am I getting that right?
Yep.
Yeah. So you also had like a gym family before us, which always makes things tough for like a transition.
Yeah.
Which like I feel like my first CrossFit gym, if I think back to that, like I'm still partial to like the things they did in a lot of ways, just because like that was my first experience and like that was my home for a long time. So it's like I'm sure it was a tough transition, even if we're the best gym in the world. That you just miss things from home, I'm guessing.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was probably the biggest thing I missed, other than my direct family. But I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of my actual family members come to that gym, so
Yeah.
it's hard not being able to see them as frequently. And like you do have your biases from things that you're used to. Like that was my CrossFit upbringing, was with my brother and sister in my parents' gym or garage at first, and then they opened the gym when I was a freshman in college. So been with them for a while.
And they kind of have like functional training. It's not affiliate though. Yeah. So, but it's definitely like has a lot of like the style of flair of like what a CrossFit gym would have. So like you've been training in that style of fitness for how long now?
About 8 years.
Yeah.
I think going on 9.
So
They
almost a
opened
decade.
2015, and then we dabbled in some CrossFit beforehand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know this, and I feel like I probably should with you being a member here, but like, do you have goals in CrossFit or fitness still?
I do. I mean, so we've always competed with my sister, my brother-in-law, and a guy from the gym named Bruce. Shout out to Bruce. So I just really love competing with them. It's just something special about competing with them. I've never competed with anybody but them. One time I competed in a team of 3 with the 2 boys while my sister was pregnant. So that was just about the only time we didn't. So I don't see myself as a, career CrossFitter by any means. I think my way of like competing in CrossFit is helping other people to keep competing in CrossFit at this point, and me just doing some local competitions, things like that. I mean, hey, wherever life wants to take me, but that's kind of what I think.
So you've basically exclusively competed team?
Yeah. No, I've never done an individual competition.
That's just not your thing?
That seems terrifying.
Just like pressure wise?
Yeah, I guess I just have never done it. I don't know. Maybe I would if there was something local, but
Yeah.
I just haven't. I think I have a lot of weaknesses, and it helps to have a good team to pull those weaknesses up. And vice versa, I have strengths that pull up, like my sister and I have, help each other out in different departments.
Interesting. I feel like you got a pretty good mindset, like head on your shoulders. Like I feel like you'd be like a pretty level-headed competitor.
Yeah, mine goes a little blank when I compete sometimes.
Which isn't always a bad thing.
Yeah, my brother-in-law is always the brains for us. It's like tells us how many we've left. One of our brains are completely dead during a workout.
Yeah,
So
that's how I'm like. Anytime my heart rate gets over like 160, I'm pretty much dead to the world in terms of like brain power.
yeah,
It doesn't work well.
Poor Sid's experienced that just working out some casual workouts here with me. So
Yeah, but you definitely got the performance to boot. It's not just like I don't want to say just like a PT, but like you definitely have a foot into the functional world and like have a good bit of performance there. And you're also like a professional in the physical therapy world. So that's got to be an interesting combo. We'll get into that more. But do you have like why physical therapy? Like, do you have like a extensive like injury history? Did you like have like an experience that pushed you that way? Like, why physical therapy?
I mean, I did. I played sports growing up. I wouldn't consider myself an overly athletic child. I mostly just did the sport and that was it. I didn't train for it or do anything extra, just showed up to my high school sport. Did a little bit of like dance and stuff growing up. So then when I was running, I did injure my hip at one point and I went to physical therapy and it honestly didn't help. And I don't know if that was me as a high school, adolescent teenager not wanting to put in the work that it needed or what, but I do kind of think back to that and think that was like kind of part of it because I wasn't really able to keep, like I was running cross country and I did have to be out a couple of beats for that, and then I ended up not running cross country through to my senior year, pretty much because of my hip pain. So I think maybe that attributed to that a little bit. I don't know, it just was something to be able to help people in a way that wasn't, direct medicines or something that's going to be able to keep people in the game, is kind of my goal. So, I mean, I feel like just maybe that one injury. I'm not entirely sure why initially, but it's definitely developed a lot like since I was in PT school, especially with my sister opening up that gym while I was in PT school, because then I could really see the relation there for, people as they're getting injured and then they stop coming to the gym or they start coming back months later and they're so down on themselves for all of the work that they lost, they put in. So like that's my driving passion now, and kind of was going through PT school to be able to, help people modify so they can stay in the gym, because there's just so many benefits to fitness in general. So, it doesn't make sense that when we get injured, we just stop exercising. There's a lot of ways to work around to stay in the gym. So just being able to keep people doing what they love.
Do you like walk into a gym, maybe especially CrossFit gyms, because like people are doing like more, for lack of a better word, of like extreme exercises like snatches and kipping pull-ups, and like a lot of the movements are just like stuff that you don't see in like, a gym that has like all machines, right? Like obviously the potential for injury is higher when you're doing a lot of complex exercises. Do you feel yourself like walking into CrossFit gyms or like similar type gyms and like you just want to like stop people, or like, are you worried for people?
No, I'm not worried for people. I think there's a lot of risk factors that go into getting injured. And honestly, a lot of the evidence doesn't really show now that CrossFit is any more dangerous than a track and field athlete or than an Olympic weightlifter or just a general, like there's like studies with like rugby players, football players. And I mean, it depends on where you look, but a lot of it shows that it's pretty similar injury rates. So I don't typically worry about that. I mean, some movements, like we talked about the other day, make me a little more skeeved out, but generally, no, I don't. I think there's just so many benefits that outweigh the negatives. It's definitely not something that I think of. But I mean, I'm biased too, because I've spent a lot of time in the gym and probably done some not great things in my life and I've been relatively okay. So I don't know. It's just not something I think about. Also, I feel like when I walk into a gym, I'm pretty like focused, usually running a little bit late and have to come in, get my warm up on. So I'm not really taking in much of my surroundings.
Yeah. You kind of have to like make, when it's your time in the gym, like move your focus more internal. Versus like focusing on what other people are doing, because you got to worry about your own movement.
Yeah. I mean, as you get to know people, then I do like tend to watch things, especially I was coaching at my sister's gym for those 8 years. So, you see people doing things, you're like, oh, okay, that's something we'll talk about the next time I'm coaching class. And because when you're in the background, sometimes resting between sets, you see a little bit more than when you're coaching a class of 30, 40 people. You just have more time to take it in. That's
like my favorite type of session is like when I get to like back squat and just like sit there for like 3 minutes in between sets, and then I can like coach in between sets. I don't feel like I'm like distracting myself.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that there's certain, and you've already given like the caveat of like, I don't think CrossFit's like inherently dangerous, or that like people are gonna like have catastrophic injuries if they stick with it, like that sort of thing. Like, not that that stuff doesn't happen ever, but like generally that's not how you're thinking about it. But you did mention there's certain movements that like skeeve you out. Which ones?
I really handstand push-ups in general, but especially the ring handstand push-up we talked about the other day. That's not programmed in your local box. That's just not. But I just started CrossFit. I just don't understand that movement.
Yeah.
Not my favorite. Or snatches get sketchy. People's mobility is not great. And sometimes our egos are bigger than maybe our skill set has worked up to be yet. And so that can be a sketchy movement for people. But generally you can bail and
you think that's like largely like a risk for like shoulders, or you thinking about people dropping bars on them and that sort of thing?
All of the above. Yeah.
All the above.
I mean, I'd be lying if I said I haven't dropped a snatch on my low back one time. Yeah. That was not a good experience. Seeing people fail some snatches, it's bad ways. Mm-hmm. Elbow dislocations, things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you do think about those things a little bit more as a physical therapist, because the bulk of people that I see are injured from, many things, including sitting and breathing at your desk. So
that's a liability as well, not doing anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you were going to say like, we could maybe lump this into a couple different categories, but like, just like first impressions of like what you see as like the most common injuries in CrossFit from like your experience, or like, again, like that type of training. What kind of injuries have you seen a lot?
I mean, sprains and strains are the most common across the board. I mean, and just to throw this out there too, there really isn't a lot of CrossFit specific research. There's some, but a lot of it is also gathered just from like team sports and athletics. But there is some CrossFit research, and the most common like shoulder type of pathologies or rotator cuff, bicep. That's also just from, following some people, some good mentors, kind of what they see the most and what I've seen the most too. So some like tendinitis, tendinosis, tendinopathy type of things, pretty common. Bicep irritation, some labral pathologies. I say those are most common. And then back pain is pretty common. Shoulder and back are the two most injured things, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, coaching people, like you get enough, clients that you're going to see all the gamut of injuries. And yeah, I could definitely agree with that. I mean, so obviously like the joints are asked to do a lot in CrossFit, and not everybody moves perfectly. And but also there's just a lot more joint stress on certain things. Like I'm thinking about how hard like a rotator cuff is going to have to work to basically keep the ball and socket in place on butterfly kipping pull-ups.
Oh yeah.
It's a lot. Mm-hmm. So that plus you're under fatigue. Okay, so this isn't direct correlation, but you're increasing the risk, the more of those types of things you add in.
Yeah, I think just with the dynamic movements that we have, you have to first have the general mobility to do those movements. Then you have to have the skill, and then you have to have the strength, and then you have to build up endurance. So whenever you're kind of skipping maybe the strength and endurance and you're going right to, you can kind of do a movement, but probably don't own it fully. And then you're under fatigue and doing a lot of reps. Maybe you just joined and you're just ramping up everything really too fast. I think that's where a lot of people get into hot water.
So basically, take your time, make sure you're learning in unfatigued environments first, and that you actually have the prerequisite strength that you need for whatever movement it is, and that you can get into positions, and then you can start to slowly increase the load and increase fatigue or one of those other factors. Is that something that you feel like is able to be implemented at a CrossFit gym easily?
It's hard, especially when you're doing class programming. But I do think, there's a lot of modifications you can give people, just trying to, again, the ego, trying to hold people back that are probably pretty fit. If they're coming to a CrossFit gym, a lot of people are already fit, but they don't necessarily have that skill set down. So trying to give them modifications that challenge them, but that are also appropriate for them at the same time, where they're not going to be, overdoing it quite so easily.
Yeah. I think it's sort of a cultural thing, right? If you have a gym where people are aware of how they're moving, and it's hey, we prioritize the quality of your movement first and to make sure you can get into good positions. And we don't do that at the expense of you just RXing a workout or for you just to say that you did it, or to, be able to not have to feel like you're not doing the same workout as everybody else, or however you want to word that. But yeah, I mean, that's not necessarily an easy thing to do, but I definitely think if you create a culture of that, that's probably a step in the right direction at least.
Yeah, and like you said, that it's hard to get people to want to do that because they feel like they're not even doing the same workout as someone else. Even, just if they're injured and they're replacing, maybe we have discussed, 4 movements that are going to be not so great for them right now, and they have some subs for them. And maybe there's 3 of those 4 movements programmed in the workout. Now they're oh, I feel like I'm hardly doing it. But I do think that's the benefit of CrossFit at the same time, that there's that culture that you're just in the community, that you're happy to be there working out with this group of people, even if you're not doing exactly the same thing. So I think on one hand, it makes it hard because you're not doing the same thing as everyone else. But then on the other hand, you're just happy to have that community there and, have support from people and know that you're working towards getting back to that. Or even if you're never getting back to that movement, just that you're there getting a sweat on, you're with your friends. And so I think it can be helpful too.
Yeah. Let's go back to the shoulder and the back for now, and then maybe we can expand it to other areas as well. So let's go to the back. Let's say specifically maybe low back, to keep it a little bit narrower. What do you see as the main causes of low back injuries for CrossFit specifically? And then what are some of those things that people can do to prevent that?
I think that's such a hard question, especially the low back. I mean, a lot of low back pain can be from hip immobility that causes them to be overusing their back. Like if they don't have proper hamstring length or just hip range of motion, they can't get into good setups for their deadlift, their squat. And when they're in the end range of their hip mobility, then they're getting it from elsewhere. You rob Peter to pay Paul. If you're not getting it from the hips because they're tight or they're weak or you don't have that motor patterning, then you're going to get it from somewhere else. And typically, I think that's the low back. I mean, it can be the knees, can be the ankles. That's what, there's a lot going on there. So yeah, the hips, I think just general, again, like overuse, ramping up too fast. So, if you're going from doing CrossFit once a week or twice a week, and then you're there 5 days a week and you're doing hang cleans and hang power cleans and dumbbell snatches and devil's presses, and you're doing a lot of hinging and using the back, which is good and it helps strengthen it. But you go from doing that once or twice a week, now you're New Year's resolutioner, or your kids are done with their soccer season, so you're back and you're coming consistently, and then all of a sudden that spike in training volume, load, intensity is just too much for the back. So
yeah, that's definitely something that I've seen and actually experienced myself. Like often when if I've tweaked my back, it's like I've done either like a ton of like flexion based hinging where it's like I was mulching the week before and I was like literally like bending over at my waist for like hours. Like
it's the worst.
Yeah. Or like, people go out and like shovel their lane in winter and they don't let us know that. And they come in and they do dumbbell snatches and it's like, oh, I tweaked my back. It's like, well, yeah, you were super fatigued and like already not in a great position. And then combine that with like sometimes certain gyms are going to have sloppy programming where it's just like the same pattern sit multiple days in a row. And it's not really like the care isn't really taken to like think about the considerations of like, how many contractions people are doing in a certain pattern. So obviously like the program design thing is one aspect of it. And obviously there might not be a lot if someone wants to be a class goer that they can do about that besides like maybe taking themselves out of class once in a while if they realize that like I'm not in the right position to do this. Again, besides maybe like the program side of things, like for like the average person who maybe is coming to like our classes, for example, what are some things that they could be doing that's going to at least like mitigate the chances of them getting like a back injury?
Well, I mean, the stronger you are going into any kind of sport or activity, the better or more resilient you're going to be in the first place. So just building up general strength. If you have more developed glutes, hamstrings, posterior chain, then you're going to be more tolerant to that higher load volume. So I think strengthening is really great. The hip mobility, I think, is really great to be working on.
Yeah. So for the strengthening specifically, if someone, let's just say they are susceptible to, or at least they think they're susceptible to low back injuries where they've had injuries before and they're worried about having that again. Is that something where it's like, hey, let's pull back some of the volume on maybe your deadlifting or power cleaning or things like that, where it's like a very, it's like a central movement, but it's like there's a lot more shear on the back. Do you replace that with maybe like glute bridges or, isometrics like a source and hold or something where it's like you're still working the glute and the hamstring, but it's not like in like the highest absolute loading, or like what might that look like?
I mean, I think first you pull back just the general intensity of it. If someone can't tolerate a deadlift, can they do a deadlift with less weight and add some tempos or some like pauses so that you still get a training effect for the deadlift, but not to where it's injuring you? And then if that's still not tolerable, maybe you do like a dumbbell, a single or double dumbbell. So you change the modality a little bit, or you add bands, dial it back in that way. And then if you can't find any way that it's, similar, it looks like a deadlift still, if that's still not tolerable, then maybe go into a hip thrust or like a loaded glute bridge with your feet elevated. If that's still not tolerable because it's still a hip hinge, then maybe doing some isometric loading. So doing like a hip, like the, I actually can't, I read that word all the time, the source and hold. Yeah, the back extension hold off of like the GHD machine, doing like those planks where you're doing like a backwards plank from the benches, something like that. Yeah. So first, like regress regress that movement to the most tolerable version, but you're still getting a good training effect. And then if that's not working, where you can do anything that looks remotely like deadlift, finding things that train those muscles, because you don't want to just completely stop training your posterior chain because it hurts whenever you hip hinge or whenever you pull.
Yep.
You still want to keep those muscles strong. It's just maybe your technique isn't good for that, or maybe you have some mobility or motor control things that you need to work on before you can do that specific movement pattern.
Yeah. So try to keep it as similar as possible, where, yeah, like either scale back the loading and then try to keep the same pattern. If that doesn't work, then you're going to kind of things that are going to still work those muscle groups, but not necessarily be in that specific range of motion that's maybe irritable to you.
Yeah. And if you can't figure it out on your own, find a good physical therapist.
That's right. Then they go to you. So how much pain do you think people should tolerate?
So it depends what they're dealing with. If it's, Achilles tendinitis, a patellar tendinopathy, it's something more like tendon related, I think you can tolerate a good amount of pain. I mean, if we use a scale from 0 to 10, let's say, like usually what I tell my patients is you can have up to 5 out of 10 pain when you're doing something. And that's for someone who is not, fibbing to themselves a little bit. Some people say
like
they're
just really wanting to like go in and work out, and it's like an 8, and they're like, this isn't so bad today.
Yep. So I would say like up to a 5. I mean, probably like 3-ish is our more like the better scale we're looking for during the workout, because then you might get home and find out, I pushed out a little bit too much, I'm a little too sore. So, I mean, if you can be at a 3-4 during the workout, and then afterwards you're not paying for it, and the next day you're kind of back to your baseline, that's a good place to be. If you're at a 3-4 during the workout, and then you go home and you're like, ooh, I'm getting a little stiff, and the next morning you can't walk, can't get out of bed, you know that was too much for you. So it's really person dependent. And then, if we're dealing with someone who I think maybe there's some bony involvement, like a stress fracture, kind of stress reaction, then we don't want any pain when they're working out in that case, because that pain is going to indicate potentially more damage, versus the tendons need to be loaded in order to progress and heal them. So some pain is actually a good thing, because you want some stress in that area, depending on the severity of it, but generally.
Do you have a topic that you'd like to request as a future show, or just a question about training? Reach out to me. My email is ben@zorfitness.com, or you can DM me on Instagram @zorfitness. Lastly, head over to zorfitness.com if you want to browse all of our previous shows with in-depth show notes, as well as educational content for all things training. All right, so let's make this a consultation for me right now.
Oh boy.
And that way we don't have to pretend about anything, but I can give you a specific example. So right now I'm dealing with, or it's actually basically cleared up now, but I was dealing with some like plantar fasciitis, basically. Like I had went for a run like in the wintertime, and just like it literally was never better for like months. And so like I rested it for a while, and now I'm to the point where I'm like reintroducing like bounding volume and like select doses, and like kind of like you said, letting some irritation be okay, but like trying not to overdo it, and sort of like using my gauges. Like if the next day it's like, all right, like I probably didn't overdo it, and I can kind of keep building on it. So how long should someone like let irritation like that, like when I kind of had that acute first like irritation, let's call it, how long should someone let that go? Or is it okay to like immediately have that irritation and like be okay with like that maybe 5 out of 10 pain? So like how long should someone wait before they like start to like reintroduce things, or like keep at it?
Well, I think part of answering that is going to be knowing what like part of your season you're in. If you're in the winter, you probably weren't doing the like, open was over at that point. So
this was before the season. So I actually dealt with it the whole way through, and then afterwards is sort of when I was like, okay, no more bounding of any kind. So that's actually sort of what I did.
Yeah, it depends on the injury too. So something like that, I think you are better off resting a little bit and pulling out running, because your plantar fascia doesn't get a rest. It's, you walk around, you're going to put some irritation through it. So I think you do need to pull that back pretty quickly. Otherwise, it's probably going to keep getting irritated. But at the same time, keeping loading in, doing some, heel raises, big toe flexion, things that are going to help load that area, but not with like the full weight through it, and, bounding, running, where it's going to be so much extra force through it. And then, so if you're in season, you don't really have choice. You kind of have to just keep doing it. And it's not probably going to do you any favors by pulling it out for 2 weeks and then doing a high level competition and doing a ton of reps. Like, you probably better off to keep it kind of loaded and warmed up and
as minimal without losing like the qualities of the tissue basically.
But in general, I mean, it's going to depend on how tolerant someone is to pain too, and the structures. I don't know how to answer that question. I'm sorry. No,
I mean, that actually does it quite a bit of justice. I think like it does, like it's dependent on the person, where they're at, like what the specifics of it are. But like there's definitely some general principles like you laid out already. Like if it is something that's more tendon based, like you're going to be able to tolerate more irritation to it, and it'll probably in some ways could even be beneficial to at least, not necessarily the irritation itself, but what kind of come along with that can be helpful. Whereas like there's other types of injuries and categories where it's like you need to immediately basically pull back and not tolerate any real degree of pain.
Yeah, and I mean, I also think like if you injured it on Monday and on Saturday you have an event, you probably don't need to spend all week irritating it. Yeah. So I would pull it out at the first sign of irritation, just so we don't develop further issues. Yeah. And just with any injury, that the second you notice pain, don't necessarily have to jump ship. You can trial it out, see how it is the next day. If it's still giving you problems, then we should probably think about dialing it back or modifying something, or at the minimum taking a video of ourselves, like, are we doing something funky that's causing this to be maybe overloaded, and give us something to do about it in the meantime. But
So let's say somebody has like bicep tendinitis or something along those lines, where it's like if they do snatches it bothers it, and if they do kipping pull-ups it bothers it, like a arch position essentially. And say again that they've been in an off season, they kind of like were rehabbing it for a period of time, and like they're like, okay, you're kind of cleared a little bit to like start to like at least do like the stuff that like your sport movements again in like unfatigued low volume settings. Again, in that sort of a setting, like what might someone be able to tolerate in terms of like pain for that?
I would keep pain levels low, especially as you're first getting back into something. Hopefully, during your time off, you weren't truly off, and you were doing maybe some pressing overhead in a modified range, working on some scapular mechanics, some thoracic, some other regions that are going to be dependent on how your shoulder then tolerates this higher skilled movement like kipping or snatching or overhead squatting. So once you're getting back into it, hopefully you've built up the resiliency of some of those tissues surrounding it, and pain should be pretty low. I would say you don't want to be having over a 3 out of 10 pain with that.
So basically, if you went through your rehab process correctly, like pain should be very minimal either way.
Yeah, and so I never like patients to think that they're never going to have pain ever again, because the body kind of remembers you're probably going to run into some irritation in that area. It's very I think it's pretty unlikely that you'll never have any irritation there ever again, especially when you're doing high level things like you're doing in CrossFit, and you're going to have some irritation, and that doesn't mean it's injured, but just knowing that there's going to be something that you feel there, and that doesn't mean we just need to pull back all the time, because sometimes you can push through pain and get better, but most times that's not going to be the best thing, and neither is complete rest. So you just want to kind of toe the line somewhere in the middle. It's going to be where most people find success.
Yeah, and another thing that I've seen is like, okay, someone injures their low back. They're deadlifting, they hurt a pop, and they struggle to walk for a couple days, and like, okay, say it's 6 weeks down the line and they feel pretty normal again. And it's like they started to deadlift. They're not really having issues, but like when they do deadlifts in a workout, like their back blows up and they're like freaking out that they're going to re-injure their back. Is there like processes that you take people through from like in your practice that like it helps them to at least begin to either like cope with, like basically how do you like build that confidence again in like whatever pattern that is? Like if someone injured their shoulder doing kipping pull-ups, they're scared to do them and they slowly start reintroducing them. Like how do you help them build that confidence back in like whatever tissue got injured or area got injured?
Yeah, I think you just have to build up that shoulder or that back to be the most resilient you can in your off time. And then I feel like I'm just kind of being repetitive at this point, but as you're coming back, you need to get your strength first. So we shouldn't just go back into a high volume workout. I don't think after a back injury, the best thing to come back and do is DT. That would be a horrible first day back at the gym. Maybe you should look at your programming ahead of time and make sure that's not going to be your first day back. Or if it is, use light dumbbells, add some tempos, and just you're probably not going to get the same stimulus that the coach is maybe looking for you to have, but just have to make sure you're doing what's appropriate for you. But as far as building their confidence back up, hopefully that you have done enough strenuous things in your PT clinic. Like if you're getting formal PT, I think sometimes a detriment or a disservice that we do for patients is give them only band exercises and some body weight like squats or a really light kettlebell deadlift whenever they're going to be coming back here and lifting 350 pounds. And maybe I can't do that with them in the clinic because unfortunately insurances are going to roll that to some extent, or maybe you don't have access to that. Maybe you don't have a dumbbell or a barbell or enough weights in your clinic, but then you're giving them that as homework. Okay, I want you to go hit 4 sets of 6 with a 5-second tempo and you're going to do it at 6 RPE, so making sure that you're incorporating that while you have eyes on them, hands on them, where you're going to have them do that you saw them Monday, you're not going to see them until next week. And you say, can you do that once over the weekend? Plus, these exercises you already have them doing. So giving them not so much of like their HEP, but something to work on outside of their HEP.
Yeah. Nick and I were sitting there for like 15 minutes staring at the sheet like, HEP, what does that mean?
It's home
exercise program. Finally got it. We actually didn't get it. You had to explain it to us. But yeah, I mean, I think what maybe you're saying is like, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm interpreting this wrong, but like PT typically can take somebody so far, but often there's a gap for the people who are higher level performance. And that's certainly not like the majority of the people that you're going to be working with. But for people who are getting like athletes who are getting back to performance, who are like more than just like a casual gym goer who's like, I want to go in and like lift some weights. And really it's like, minimum dumbbell weights and things like that. It's like, hey, I'm actually going to be going back in and like lifting up to a max at some point in this lift. And it's like a good thing for me to be as confident as I possibly can be. It's like, hey, you need to be more diligent about strengthening that and then sort of like bridging the gap between like, I don't mean this to be offensive, but like PT exercises in that sort of world towards like going to like the gym and like doing those exercises. Not that there's like two separate worlds, but like often there can be like a gap there, if that makes sense. Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's a huge gap, and that's a problem a lot of physical therapists are looking to fill with cash-based services. Whether it's after you're done with them, then they wrote a program for you that has some, kind of souped up HEP stuff for them to do, something that's more of that bridging the gap type exercises, and something that I've, done some for some of our gym members and some people after even just my regular patients, they need a little bit more, and I kind of write them out like a programming for a month rather than just here's 10 exercises or 5 exercises I want you to do and keeping them stagnant. You need some progressive overload. So they need to be able to have that ramp up between PT and going back into the gym fully. And I mean, I think there's a lot of people who do that well, but I think, in your small, maybe rural towns and places where you have...
just say Whitesport, Pennsylvania. It's okay.
Well, where I'm from too. So it's hard to find someone who has the time, the drive, the passion to do that. I mean, that's why having a physical therapist who has your interests or has worked with people with your interests, you have to know, just like I couldn't work with an Olympic level gymnast. I could, but I'm not going to do them the same level of service as someone who's used to working with someone like that or someone who was a gymnast in their past. I work with barbell athletes, recreational athletes. I mean, I work with lots of other people too. But that's like my area of special interest where I would consider myself maybe slightly more versed in those types of populations. Yeah, those are my people. Yeah. I do it. I know what it feels like. I know a lot of things that I've done to get back from injuries like that, or had friends and family do to get back from things like that. So just the experience to be able to kind of feel it out with a patient and help them get back to it at these nuanced movements. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm super thankful that you're here and that we can send people your way, where it's like, it's not just, me as their coach, like guessing about what's going on. Like you can actually like, help them diagnose what's the problem and give them the care that they need. And it's like to have someone who understands the demands of CrossFit and also doesn't like poo-poo on it is like
super helpful. But also, like, I feel like you have a really realistic expectation of like what someone should be able to handle within CrossFit, and like what is potentially, for lack of better words, dangerous or like maybe like more risky. It's been super helpful to like have you like basically collaborating with like working with a patient to like figure out like PT coach, like this is sort of like in the middle. Is like, for example, like the one time I shared one of the designs with you, and you could kind of go in and say like, hey, this person's dealing with like a shoulder thing. They need more horizontal pulling, or maybe, I don't think you worded it that strongly. You're like, hey, I would suggest there's more of like a, a 3-to-1 push to pull with like more horizontal pulling. And like, that's only going to help stabilize the shoulder and like help, again, minimize the irritation that person was getting. So yeah, I hope that's where the world of things is slowly continuing to move, because it's exciting from my perspective to see that.
Yeah. Well, thanks. And yeah, it's a good relationship for me too, because it's hard to be able to be someone's eyes in the gym all the time. So if someone has a coach and someone who can communicate with you, that communication is going to be so important for that athlete to get back to where they were. 'Cause it's hard to keep that communication with them whenever I'm in the clinic, 8+ hours a day. And then I come to the gym and see them touch base for a little bit. And, so it's nice to have you giving me some feedback or showing me what you're doing. And then I can say, okay, well, that's good, but maybe let's add a little extra of this in, or maybe they're not quite ready for that. Just based on what I saw last week when I was treating them, some ideas to go bounce back and forth with, I think are, definitely nice to have. Because it's hard sometimes when I send people back to just like a Globo gym and I don't have anyone to tell me how they're actually moving outside of the clinic. So it's nice to have that communication back as well.
Yeah. And like a good chunk of the people here, like you sometimes come in the AM, sometime in the PM, like, so you actually probably do see a good chunk of our gym's population, like our membership.
The 5:30ers. I don't see you guys, sorry. AM.
Yeah, but
then 9 a.m.
I mean, I can't really blame you. I don't see the 5:30 much either.
Yeah.
By design. Not that I don't like them, just I don't want to be awake and conscious at that time. It's early.
Same.
Leave that to Stacy. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a blessing to have somebody like you in our community, so I appreciate that. Where can people find you? Got anything you want to share?
Physically or?
Physically, they can find you here, Boysford, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, so I work at Lycoming Physical Therapy in Montoursville, and you can find me here at Lumber Capital. I have an Instagram. You can reach out to me on that. I think it's just my name with a little underscore thing in between the first and the last name. Yeah.
Awesome.
Alicia _Archangelo. Nothing fancy. I don't have a physical therapy account or anything, but if you have any questions, you can definitely reach out to me. I don't mind.
Awesome. Well, thanks for doing this. Maybe we'll come back some other time if we have specific questions from people. So if you got questions for her, drop them in the comments and or let me know. You can email me, ben@zwerfitness.com. Feel free to send us your questions and free advice from our unofficial in-house physical therapist. So Alicia, thanks for doing this today.
Yeah, thanks. It's fun.
Thanks for listening today. If you're someone who just started listening to the show, I would encourage you to subscribe so you can stay up to date. If you're someone who's been listening for a while, I would encourage you to rate and review the show. And lastly, the best thing that you can do to support our work is also the best thing that you can do for your performance. And that is by hiring one of our coaches. Until next time, stay the course.